Hi guys, it's Miss Prickett, and I'm going to go over with you page 251 in your math textbook in lesson 6.6, where we are comparing fractions using benchmarks. I have pulled up over here on the left side of my screen a website called toytheater.com, where you can use virtual fraction strips to compare various fractions. And so I'm just going to click these that are already there off the screen, and you can see that you can just drag and drop them. Okay, so in the share and show activity on page 251, number 1 says compare 2/5 and 1/8, and they've given you a number line with benchmarks that show 0, 1/2, and 1. And then they have made fraction strips here at the bottom for you. This one is divided into fifths, and this one is divided into eighths, because our first fraction is 2/5. And so we're going to shade in 2/5 over here. And then we are going to shade in 1/8, and that is how we're going to compare. So it is very obvious by looking at this that 2/5 is much closer to 1/2 than 1/8 is. So 2/5 is greater than 1/8. Number 2 says 1/2 is less than or greater than 4/6. Well, I know that 4/6 is larger because I know that 3/6 is equivalent to 1/2. And so I can do this one without even comparing over here and using a visual for it. I know that 3/6 and 1/2 are equal. And so 4/6 is greater than. And so 1/2 is, drew that the wrong way, is less than, 4/6. Number 3, 3/10 and 1/2. Well, one of the things that I know when I'm thinking about halves is that I have to, if I could figure out what half is equivalent to in tenths, of course I know that this is 5/10 is also equals 1/2. And so since this is 3/10, 3/10 is less than 1/2. Okay, for 11/12 and 4/8, I know that 4/8 is equivalent to 1/2. I see it right here. I also know that 11/12, it would only take one more 12th in order to make that a whole 1. And so 11/12 is greater than 4/8. If I look at 5/8 and 2/5, then I can quickly know that I can look back up here and at the fraction bars that they've given me, and I can compare these. 2/5 is already modeled there for me, and I can shade in some more of these and make 5. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so I know that 5/8 is greater than 2/5. So sometimes you can use the tools that are right there on your page. All right, let's look at 8/10 and 3/8. Well, 8/10 is really close to being 1. Okay, so if I had added 2 more tenths to this, I would know that that would get me to a whole, which is 1. And 3/8, I can compare it to 4/8, which is 1/2. And so I know that if this one, if 8/10 is almost 1 and 3/8 is almost a half, then obviously 8/10 is greater than 3/8. And so that's what they mean by comparing it to using benchmarks. You use what you already know and to figure these out logistically. All right, so if I'm looking at 1/3 and 7/12, this one might be a little bit more difficult, but One of the things that I can do is if I want to use this, we'll use the virtual fraction tool for this. My first fraction is 1/3, and so I'm going to click and drag 1/3 here. And then my second fraction is 7/12. And so I come down here and I find my 12ths and I drag 7 of those up here. Makes 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, I could have stopped right here at 4/12 because then I would know that 4/12 and 1/3 are exactly the same. So 7/12 is definitely going to be larger than 1/3. So 1/3 is less than 7/12. Number 8, 2/6 and 7/8. This is also one of those where I can compare it to 1. All that I need is one more 8 here, and this would be 1. So 7/8 is really close to a whole, which is 1. And 2/6 is really close to a half because I know that 3/6 is equal to 1/2. So 2/6 is significantly less than 7/8. All right, what about 4/8 and 2/10? Well, 4/8 is equivalent to 1/2. I know that because 4 is half of 8. And then 2/10 is not very big at all. This is a pretty small fraction. And so I know that 5/10 is equal to a half. And this 2 is significantly smaller than that. So 4/8 is greater than 2/10. All right, 3/4 and 1/2. I'll use my virtual tools over here just for fun. But 3/4 is almost a whole. And all I would need is one more fourth to make a whole. And I'll show you that in comparison here. Let me put a 1 whole up there. I've got 3, oops, I'm pulling thirds, sorry. 3/4, 1, 2, and 3. And then I have 1/2, which is going to be here. So I know that 2/4 is equal to 1/2, equivalent to, and so 3/4 is significantly larger than 1/2. So 3/4 is greater than 1/2. Number 11, 6/6. Okay, so any number, any fraction that is the same, has the same numerator and the same denominator equals 1. So this one is equivalent to 1. And 1/3 is, of course, a third of 1. So 1 is definitely greater than 1/3. What about 4/5 and 1/6? Well, from this one, I can look at this and go, okay, this one is only 1/5 away from being 1, so it's really close to 1. And it would take 5 more 6s in order to get to 1. So 4/5 is greater than 1/6. What about 5/8 and 9/10? Again, I know that it would only take one more 10th in order for this to be a whole 1. And 5/8 is just barely more than 4/8, which is a half. So this one is close to 1, and this one is just barely over a half. And so I know that 5/8 is less than 9/10. All right, let's scroll on down to number 14. And here you are finding a numerator that makes the statement true. And so there are many options for these answers that you could put. 2/4 is equivalent to 1/2. Okay, so 2 is half of 4. So this is saying 2/4 is less than how many 6? Okay, it would be equal to 3/6, which would also be a half. So this could be 4, or this could be 5. So you technically could have 4 or 5 as a numerator for this, and this statement be true. 8/10 is greater than how many 8s? Well, this could be any number between 1, it could be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or even 6. So any number between 1 and 6 would be okay for this one right here. 10/12 is greater than how many fourths? Well, this one could be 1. 1/4 is definitely, 10/12 is greater than 1/4. It's greater than 2/4, which is a half. And so definitely 1 or 2 would be perfectly good answers for those. 2/5 is less than how many tenths? So this number is going to need to be larger. 2/5, we can use our virtual fractions over here and take a look at those. Let's pull up 2/5 here and use some tenths. So it could be 1/10. I'm sorry. 2/5 is less than, and so we're going to need enough tenths for it to be bigger than 2/5. So 4/10 is equivalent to 2/5. Okay, so anything above 5, so this could be any number 5 through 9, okay, would be greater than 2/5, which would mean that 2/5 is less than 5/10, 6/10, 7/10, 8/10, and even 9/10. All right. When two fractions are between 0 and 1/2, how do you know which fraction is greater? Okay, so if you got two fractions in there between 0 and 1/2, how do you know which one is greater? Well, a possible answer to that would be the fraction that is closer. I don't know if I can write this. The fraction that is closer to 1/2 would be greater. It's really hard to write with a mouse, guys. Okay, so I hope that was helpful, and I hope that works okay with you guys. My other recording method was not working properly, so hopefully this gives us what we need for this activity. Thanks. Talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.